All right, you're watching Boomtown, a podcast about Huntsville's explosive growth, both on and off the Arsenal. I'm Cameron Walker, your host. I'm the broker owner of Cameron Walker Realty, located right here in Huntsville. And you're joining me and my co-host, Megan. We love that you guys are here. We ask that you subscribe so we can keep you informed of everything that's going on in Huntsville. All right, welcome back to the Boomtown podcast. I'm Cameron Walker, broker owner of Cameron Walker Realty, here again with my host, Megan.
And I'm Megan Hines, and I am a realtor at Cameron Walker Realty.
Thank goodness, right?
Yes.
Well, previously we talked a little bit about what people didn't expect moving here, and we talked a lot about some of the stuff that we came to know and love about Huntsville, and some of the things we weren't so excited about. But we didn't really touch on one of the biggest things, particularly when it states, when we're talking about real estate and how it relates to that, is the buyer beware nature of Alabama. I know you coming from the West Coast and me moving here from the East Coast, those are areas that have a lot of buyer protections in place.
Yes,
so kind of like, I guess, give me a quick rundown of how, like, your take on buyer beware and what people should be looking out for.
Well, I think you need to think of it as sometimes called a non-disclosure state. So the way that this is going to affect you in reality is that you're not going to receive the disclosure. If you sell a house in most states, you'll have to put together a disclosure, which is going to take you some time. You're going to have to find out the condition of all the major systems in your home and then disclose that. And that disclosure almost counts as a warranty, right? I am attesting that my air conditioner is in this condition, right? And that doesn't happen here at all. You could just be like, I have no idea anything about this home, and please buy it.
For sure. Like, I've been doing videos for about 3 years about the area. And I think the first 5 videos, I probably mentioned buyer beware on all of them. And one of them's even titled buyer beware. And so to kind of give a definition of it, buyer beware, like what has to be disclosed is, let's say you buy a house from a realtor. They have more onus to disclose. In my experience, they do worse than better. Then you have, if there's a health or safety concern, like say there's loose asbestos in the home, or there's like a shoddy staircase that's pretty dangerous.
I mean, you can just say you don't know about pretty much anything.
That's the other part is
you don't have to find out. If you say you don't know, it's not like anybody's going to go interview everybody who works on houses in the area. You could accidentally find out, but most of the time. Just clarify on that. We're talking about the seller, right? So the seller and or their agent, like it's not, the onus isn't on us to go discover it either, right? And if I'm listing somebody's home for sale and, I go dig up all the problems with the house, I'm doing a disservice to them compared to the other 4,000 agents that won't. And because then they're not going to maximize the value of their property. So in Alabama, when we look at it from a licensing law and an ethics standpoint, we would actually be in more trouble by doing that than we are by not doing it. And so then you flip the script and you're the buyer's agent. So that's where it starts to come in play a little more. I mean, your job as the buyer and the buyer's agent is to find out. Their job is not to tell you. That being said, I do often recommend that people get a pre-listing home inspection. Yes, there is the risk. If you find out something, you have to disclose it. But this is a standard inspection that you're getting, and they're going to find out anyway. If my inspector can find it, their inspector can find it. And it's better to have a plan for a problem is coming than to hope no one notices and see if you can get away with it. That's just not how you should go through life.
No. And I do see a fair amount of homes that do have those. Where I see more disclosure is actually in the agent notes. So like if you're on Zillow and you're looking at the house, charming 4-bedroom, 3-bath, whatever, right? When we're on the MLS, there's a separate section that's only available to agents to see. And then there we'll see, roof original, HVAC 12 years old, water heater replaced 5 years ago, right? And I wouldn't say those necessarily serve as a disclosure, but it's the closest thing we're going to get. Now, something else, though, that is important is, let's say you did have one of those pre-inspections. You still don't have to disclose that, the water heater's old or whatever. But if I ask about it as a buyer or buyer's agent, you do have to give me an honest answer.
Yes. I like to call it Alabama's don't ask, don't tell policy when it comes to houses.
For sure.
It's this very, I find it sort of strange. Like I have to ask you, you have to tell me the truth. If I don't ask you, you don't have to tell me. And that's why when you're working with an agent in this state, you need to make sure that they're asking questions and getting those in writing. I like to send them in an email. That way we have a record of it, because if I ask you and we're alone in a room, who knows?
Absolutely. And if you buy like a house as is, like Alabama Supreme Court has upheld that they don't have to disclose any of this stuff or make any repairs.
Yeah.
And then, so like, I start looking at ways to mitigate the risk. So like, what are some things like, you and your clients to do? Obviously asking the questions, doing it over email, but what else would you do to kind of mitigate risk for your clients?
Looking at the house. I mean, there's a lot you can find out about a house by looking at it.
Yes.
And you start on the outside of the house. You walk around the house. Probably the biggest problem with foundations around here is water. We have moist air and we have torrential rain sometimes. Yeah. And limestone, the ground is made of limestone. So it's got holes in it. Water comes in. So you're going to be looking to see if water is hitting this house anywhere. If you have water coming towards your house on a regular basis, it's going to have a problem. Yeah. If there's no drainage and water's just coming towards your house, you can bet, even if there's no problem right now, something will develop. Yeah. And then you're looking for cracks in the brick, uneven floors. I like to have a moisture reader with me when I look at houses. That way, if, there's a lot you can see if you know how to look. Yeah. And that does mitigate risk. Yeah. And then, if a house is as is, it should be priced differently. And we get into problems when the market gets super hot around here. Yeah. Because like in 21, people needed places to live. I mean, we have people moving here, and then then it gets competitive, and then you start, throwing caution to the wind. And I just advise people. I mean, I really advise people that if you can't afford a $50,000 home repair, don't buy an as-is house. I mean, that's the bottom line. If you can afford, don't risk it if you can't lose it. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. Some things I do is I focus a lot on new construction, right? Mm-hmm. So that's another exception to the buyer beware rule. Yeah. And then also you got your liability, your warranties. You're going to get to see how the house is seated on the lot. There's drainage requirements as part of the permitting and approval now versus like what it used to be 40 years ago, where an entire mountain of water could run at your house. Now they don't allow that. They've got to be sloped away. So they're, modern building techniques and materials too are really helpful. All the houses are wrapped in a Tyvek type wrap to prevent moisture penetration. Everything's sealed. So, and then, you have the warranties for the different components on the home too. Mm-hmm. So for me, that's a big way to mitigate some of the risk, So, and you mentioned earlier that having a pre-inspection for the seller in a not so hot market, like right now, we're kind of really balanced. Mm-hmm. If it's not like a super hot property, which there are properties that get 3 offers on the first weekend, it does still happen. But if you've got something that's been on the market for a month or 2 and you're really interested, but you have some doubts or some concerns, there's nothing wrong with getting a pre-inspection before you make an offer. Now you're risking about $400, $450 on that inspection. Anybody else can come and put an offer in while you're getting the inspection. But let's say you put so the inspector can usually get out there within a day or 2, right? Mm-hmm. They can usually get your report same day. So you're not really giving up that much time. Let's say because of that, another offer comes in. If I were the listing agent, I'd be more likely to take the buyer that already had the inspection, because they're buying it with their eyes open, knowing exactly what's in this house, what the warts and all, right? Versus the person that's going to come in and do the inspection a week later, and then they're going to ask for discounts or repairs or whatever. Our offer's already going to reflect those things. And so the seller's getting a known quantity versus an unknown quantity. So I do think there's some potential there. So long as you do it quickly and, do it the right way, like you could actually be increasing your odds of getting that home, assuming you still like it after the inspection. You could be. The other thing is if you're the seller and you choose to do that, I think it's a selling point. Yeah, it absolutely is. Like if you're on the fence between 2 houses and one of them has done this, basically provided you with a disclosure, I would choose the house that I had confidence in. Sure. Absolutely. I will say the name on that report means a lot to me. Yeah. And I think everybody that's bought a house before is aware of this. Mm-hmm. There are home inspectors that grease the wheels. They're just there to keep things moving. They're see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil kind. And then there are home inspectors that are like, hey, you're missing caulk around this tiny little thing, but because they're looking at that attention to detail. Yes. So I would say the name on that report. And also you mentioned being able to visually
usually see stuff. That's a huge thing for me.
Yeah.
I do a lot of sight unseen for buyers. I've got 2 people right now under contract that won't see their house till they own it. And so, but we went through several on our way, and it's like, I've got to be their eyes and ears. So I'm sending them video of these homes, and you can see the cracks and, the different warts and everything. And it's, if I can see those with my quote unquote untrained eye as far as a home inspector, but it's not on that home inspection report from the seller, I already know that thing's like useless. Right.
Yeah.
So there is that too. Like you can, even if you don't know the other company, it's pretty obvious pretty quickly. If it's a 60-year-old home that hasn't been updated in 20 years and there's 3, defects on the home inspection report, it's not an accurate home inspection report.
Yeah. And I think we need to explain to people like what you can use to get out of a contract, like how that works. Because this is a question I get all the time.
It is. And as the broker, that's probably something that falls more on my shoulders too. So if you're in, say, California, Colorado, Washington, and you make an offer on a house, you give Earnest money, and you get the home inspection back, or you just get the willies about the house, you can pretty much get out of it and get your Earnest money back.
Yeah, you could just be like, I heard there was a ghost.
Yeah, exactly, right? In Alabama, Earnest money is used 1 of 3 ways. You go to closing, it's applied towards your closing cost or your down payment, or refunded back to you if it's in excess. If you and the seller agree to part ways, there's a form called mutual release where you agree whether the seller or the buyer gets the Earnest money or how much each of them get. And third way is you go to court. So if you can't agree and you don't go to closing, it goes to court. So this surprises a lot of people. And then so what would determine who gets what, right? And it goes back to there are protections in our contract, for health and safety related structural defects, major subsystems, electrical, plumbing, HVAC, water, right? Well, I guess that's plumbing. And then if you do a home inspection, there's a separate addendum and you have some more protections built in there. And so there are ways to protect yourself, but cosmetics are not included. Yeah. And where I see people like get into arguments and debates is this is cosmetic, this is not. And several years ago, I had had a deal where we bought a house and we had an inspection contingency, and we bought it during the coming soon phase. So it was sight unseen, not only for the buyer, but for me. Oh, wow. And so, cause I can't tour a home during the coming soon phase, but it was that 2020 market. Yeah. And when we got in there, because we did have the inspection contingency, the water heater just looked like it was about to rust out. I mean, literally you could see little spurts of water like up on the top, rust everywhere. Pipe was about to come off, but technically it got the water hot into where it was supposed to go. Yeah. And so this was an area where me and the other agent really butted heads, and she obviously had backup offers. So it was like somewhere where we really had to I really had to hammer on the contract, the condition, the very specific wording in the contract about how it would not afford my client the use of this system. And that was how we were able to get them to, I can't remember now if they replaced the water heater or if we just got a credit for it, but we were able to push it through.
So that's interesting because, if one of the things that can be tricky is that, if your air conditioner is 30 years old, they test it and make sure it's working. That's why we have to ask how old the air conditioner is, how old all the major systems are before you go under contract. Because if you have a working component that's old, that's not a reason to ask for a replacement.
Agreed. Yeah. And I did have I ran into this previously, and the house had 2 air conditioner units. The big one for most of the house was newer. There was a smaller one for just a bonus space. And I guess my client, just didn't realize it. Right. So he had actually found the house and brought it to me. And, we bought the house with the air conditioner the age it is. We walked around the outside. We looked at the units. I don't know how he didn't know the age, but when the home inspection came back, that was a big sticking point for him. So we actually brought out our own inspector to inspect the unit, because the seller wasn't going to give us the $7,000 for another unit or whatever it was. And, it was working fine. It was in great shape. That's awesome. But I had a home inspection report come back last night on a house that I have somebody under contract on. And the inspector noted in that report that the roof, the HVAC, and the water heater were all at end of life. Now, we knew this going in. This was not news to us. But, if this happened in another state where the seller would have been required to disclose that up front or ensure those things worked to whatever level, because we were here, it was below freezing all day yesterday, which is atypical for Alabama. But so the home inspector wasn't able to test the air conditioning portion of the HVAC system. Now he could test that it clicked on, You can't test whether or not it cools when it's, 27 degrees out.
Yeah.
So like we're going into this knowing that that's something likely the client's going to have to replace. Now, my client's very handy. He's looking for a fixer upper. We bought this at fixer upper price.
And I'm sure he knew that this was a possibility because you're his agent.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, yeah. And this is a conversation. Like we passed on other houses that were in worse condition, right? So like going into this, eyes open, right? Yes. But again, somebody that's coming from the West Coast or the East Coast or a larger city where there may be more buyer protections might look at this inspection report and be like, oh, well, I can ask for this, this, and this, or get out of the contract and get my earnest money back. And it's like, well, no, that thing heats and cools. It gets the water to the temperature it's supposed to be. Like, that dishwasher runs. It might be 20 years old, but it runs, right? So that's something that people have to adjust to moving here.
I mean, I had a seller from Arizona last year who told me that they had somebody put an offer on their house. Then they call me. They're like, we're ready to go. We're so excited. And then, 2 weeks later, just pull it.
Yeah.
Because they don't, there are two sides to this.
Yeah.
That person pulled it having nothing to do with the home inspection, just because he noticed something about the house that he didn't like anymore.
Right.
Or probably because he found a house he liked better.
Yeah. So it does protect sellers in this instance.
It does. But as a buyer, it's probably not preferable for most people.
Sure. Yeah. And something else too that I think a lot of people don't think about is environmental factors. So like in Alabama, because there's a quarry or an auto detailing shop or a junkyard somewhere, that's also not a reason to get out of the contract because the expectation is you did your due diligence coming into the contract. So especially working with people relocating the area, they're not going to know about these things.
Yeah.
So one of the big things I do is we look at an aerial map, and those aren't always 100% accurate.
Google Earth is really great for this. It doesn't get updated all the time. Right. So there might be something new, but like you'll find your prisons, your absolutely. All your big scary stuff's gonna be on there.
Absolutely. Right. Yeah, for sure. Especially things have been around for a while.
Yeah.
But that's something we have to point out because I've had people that are like, oh, I don't want to be within this distance of whatever, problematic thing they think is. And it's like, we really have to be careful with that. Right. Because again, it's not a reason to get out of the contract. So like I see people complain about all the time online. And it's almost funny. And it's actually part of the reason we named this podcast Boomtown is being close to the Arsenal, right?
Yeah.
So the Arsenal originally started off as a munitions testing area. And then now they still are. And they're still finding explosive devices from back then and blowing them up. There's actually a team that goes out, and I know one of the guys at night, and they blow these things up. So you might hear a huge explosion at 2 a.m. Yeah. They're also testing rockets and countermeasures and then, missile defense and all this kind of stuff there.
I live in South Huntsville. I haven't heard very many at 2 a.m., but I do. It's usually in the afternoon because I live where you can hear it. The first few times I was like, what's happening?
What's that boom?
And now we could be under attack and I'd be like, it's fine.
Exactly. Right. Well, and I was talking on a previous podcast about my wife, it's 23 minutes door to door from our house to her office on the Arsenal. And of course she can hear it there. At our house, we don't actually hear the boom. It's extremely rare we hear the boom, but our garage door shakes.
Yeah.
And so like on a non-windy day, I know that they just exploded something or tested a rocket or whatever. And rocket tests are probably the loudest. Like when I go out and walk, like I live real close to a greenway, I can hear the rocket if on a cloudy night, if they were testing maybe a month ago, and I could hear it every night when I was out walking. So, but in another state, that might be a reason not to buy or would need to be disclosed. And here it's like you move in and a month later, it's like, what's that boom? And I see it all the time. And what I know is happening is their agent is not warning them about this. And it's the same thing with like flight paths. So like you've got Huntsville International Airport. It's not a huge airport, but it's active, right?
Yeah.
And it's
a great airport.
It is. It's won a couple of awards too. Yeah. But there's several flight paths depending on where the wind's going, all that. On a cloudy night, they're coming in lower, it's louder. And if that's something that's going to disturb you, then you obviously don't want to buy a house in that flight path. If you're close to the Arsenal, they also have jets and planes that take off from there. They have helicopters. So again, even beyond just the booms, like you have a lot of noise in those areas. And I've had guys that especially ex-military that are like, yes, I want that. Right. Like that's their thing. I'm like, cool. But
boom.
but like it's on, the onus is kind of on me as the agent to make sure I inform you of these things, even though there's not like a technical written.
I mean, why would you ask if you didn't know? Am I going to be hearing loud booms at this house?
I never asked when I moved here. Right. It wasn't something I considered. And I used to live close to Quantico in Virginia, identical scenario. Right. And so that's what I think those are the things that people have to bear in mind that when they move here, like flood insurance, right? So like some sellers disclose they have flood insurance, some don't. So every single house I show before I go show it, I look at it on the FEMA flood map.
Yeah, I look at it on the FEMA flood map and things can change. Yes. So I do write often contingent on not needing flood insurance. It's a great contingency to put in there if you're not, if you are concerned about that, and you probably should be, because insurance is not getting any cheaper for anyone. No. Yes.
No. And I mean, you look at all the things going on with climate change and with all the destruction going on in different areas, flooding here, fires there, insurance is just going to continue to go up. I don't have any anticipation for it going down. But even in my own neighborhood, we have a creek that flows through the backside of the neighborhood, and 2 homes in our neighborhood just in the last couple of months were rezoned by FEMA into a flood zone that were not previously in one, right? And so they've been there for 14 years, their original owners. So now they have flood insurance because they both have mortgages. And so I actually went in for the group. We have like a, HOA Facebook page, and I printed the new flood map for everybody so they could see if their property was on it. Fortunately, they were the only 2 homes of about 200 that wound up in a flood zone. But many of them, like the backside of their property is now in a flood zone, right? Yeah. So if they were going to add like an accessory dwelling unit or something like that, now they would need flood insurance or a second garage or something.
I would familiarize yourself with that FEMA flood map, because it's not just if you're in a flood zone. If you're beside a flood zone, you could easily end up in a flood zone at some point.
Yeah. I got into a tiff with one of the city engineers a couple months ago because I don't like to sell somebody a house on the verge of a flood zone unless there's an elevation difference where we feel comfortable. Yeah. So, and you look at the people in the Carolinas and Tennessee, East Tennessee and stuff like that had floods, and they're halfway up a mountain because of those inland hurricanes that went through back to back. Right. And so even that's not a guarantee. But if you're in a neighborhood and the developer brought in a foot of dirt to get it out of the flood zone, just a heavy rain and you're back in it, right? And FEMA knows that. FEMA can go back, every 5 years they adjust, but they can adjust in between those too.
And that's bad behavior.
Right.
I mean, that really is.
No, absolutely. Right. Well, that's what me and this engineer were going back and forth about, because he was like, you should just leave it to the engineers. And I'm like, really? I'm not leaving my client's financial, like in their home and all. People like, they have like belongings they can't get back. Like I'm of the age where we still have like pictures that are not digital, that if we lose them due to a flood or mold or, fire, they're gone forever. Right. Now my kids, they'll never have that problem with that specific thing. It'll be something else.
I mean, you still don't want your house flooded.
Yeah. Right. Nobody wants to flood anyway, but it's even with insurance, it may not be something that can ever be replaced. Right. Yeah. And so like that for me is really important, but it may not be disclosed. Right. So you just got to really be diligent in everything you do.
Yeah. You have to find out. I think that's the bottom line here. The difference between buying in a buyer beware state, Alabama, which is an extreme buyer beware state, is really the things you do before you sign that contract. Yeah. You have to do your homework. You have to ask questions, ask them in writing. Yeah. You're not going to do your inspection, but you're going to look at the house in a pretty different way. You're not just going to look at it to see if you love it. Yeah. You're going to, it's like when you're a teenager and you fall in love, you just like the prettiest. Oh, look at that. I mean, you are falling in love with a house in Alabama as an adult. You're going to check and see. Absolutely. Absolutely. Does this house have a job?
Does it come with child support? Yeah. For sure.
So you're going to have to do your homework before you sign. And the other thing that Bear's mentioning here is if you need to get out of a contract or want to get out of a contract, it's not just the earnest money you might lose.
That's a great point to make. Yeah. Do you want to go deeper on that, or you want me to talk about it?
Well, I'm going to start and then you can finish. Sure. You're liable for breach of contract. Yeah. And the extent of that can vary.
It can.
I can't tell you specifically what would happen.
Absolutely.
What happens if you want out of the contract for no reason? Somebody could just say, okay, and let you out of the contract, or they could go after your earnest money, or they could go after you for breach of contract.
Yep.
If the house, if you were going to buy it at one price and then that house sits on the market for 6 months and they lose $50,000 on it, can they go after you for that? They can.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's the specific performance, which is mentioned in the contract. And that's exactly it. So if you back out of a contract for a reason that's not allowed in the contract,
yes,
and they pursue you, again, they can keep your earnest money, but then let's say the house goes back on the market for 2 months, they take $10,000 in discounts and they have to give $10,000 in closing costs. That's 20 grand they're going to hit you with potentially if they decide to sue you. They can also include any utilities, insurance, taxes they paid during that period. So they can all go in together. And that's, when they sue for specific performance, that's what they're out if you didn't buy.
Yeah.
Now, again, would I do that rather than buy a $500,000 problem? Probably, right? But there's no reason to have to do either, right? So you do your due diligence going in, making sure you understand where you're getting into. And that's why it's so important, because of these legal liabilities, for sure.
Yeah. And I think understanding the difference between a cosmetic problem, which you can, and something that interferes with the use of the property.
There you go. It's in black and white.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's not your opinion that this is a problem or not a problem. It is the fact. Like if the hot water heater I always say hot water heater, if the water heater gets to temp and it's not rusted out, or the HVAC gets to temp, even if it's at end of life, the roof's at end of life, but it's not leaking, these are all within the contract. And so
knowing the age of those systems is incredibly important.
Yeah.
That's why I was asked those, and I asked them in writing. So if they tell me something that's not true,
right,
we also have recourse there.
There you go. Yeah. And it's got to be done before you go under contract.
Absolutely.
For sure. Well, I think we've kind of run this to the ground a little bit. I don't want to terrify people moving here.
I mean, I think people buy houses here all the time and have great experiences.
Yeah.
But we maybe haven't. Maybe people still have more questions. And if they do, please hit us up.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So if you bought a house in Alabama or you're thinking about buying one, let us know. But also in the comments, tell us if you've seen problems before, or you've had to disclose something weird, or something weird wasn't disclosed. I'd love to see those. Yeah.
Just your experiences.
Yep.
Thanks everybody.
Yeah. Appreciate you guys watching. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so we can, you can catch up with us every month about what we're talking about next. Thanks for watching or listening. You can always catch us on audio on wherever you get your podcast, be Spotify, Apple, or you can watch our video on YouTube. We really appreciate you guys being here. Ask that you subscribe so we can keep you informed of everything going on here in Huntsville.